Hi, welcome to the Navigating Neurodiversity podcast. I'm Vivian, registered psychologist, and today we have with us Dr. Lisa Lim. Dr. Lisa is a speech language pathologist with over 17 years of experience in Singapore and Australia. So we will link Dr. Lisa's full bio and website in the caption below. And today we'll be discussing the topic of speech and language development in preschoolers. So thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today. Maybe the first question to lead in, we'll get Lisa to share with us a bit about her career and what sparked the interest in becoming a speech language therapist.
Thanks, Vivian, for the warm introduction. Well, I almost became a psychologist, but I was interested in speech therapy because I felt it had a really nice blend of arts. You get to learn about the linguistics, the phonetics, but then you also get to learn about the sciences with, dysphagia management, neuroanatomy, the larynx. So I thought that combination kind of suited me really well. Mm-hmm. And, the ability to speak is often taken for granted.
True.
And it's been a real privilege to work with children and adults to improve their communication skills. I think more often than not, I become the confident we're, as speech therapists, able to have that. We usually have those skills to be able to gently draw out their innermost thoughts as we work on communication. So it's a privilege and it's a fulfilling role that I cherish every day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, okay, I thought to set the stage, let us first start with what typical speech and language development looks like in a young child. Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of clarify some terminology, and I thought it'll be interesting for your listeners as well. So we have speech, and speech refers to the production of words or sounds. So, being able to say your letters clearly, your articulation. Language, on the other hand, refers to the understanding and the use of language. So are you able to string your words together to form a sentence? Is your grammar and syntax correct? Mm-hmm. And we have another component, and that's pragmatics or social communication skills. So a lot of the times, some young children have a lot of vocabulary. They're able to say their letters clearly, they're able to know their numbers, they know 150 words, they're able to label things around the house, but sometimes they're not able to then use those words functionally. Let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. So if the child knows the word milk, and he knows milk, cheese, his favorite foods, but he's not able to then request in the kitchen to his mom and say, "Mom, milk please." Mm. He ends up tugging or crying or gesturing in order to get what he wants. So that's a disconnect and that breakdown there. So it's between the use of language and knowing the language but being able to use it functionally. I think those three categories are important.
Yeah, that's great. So it's speech, language, and
pragmatics.
Yeah, social communication. Yes, thank you.
So, in terms of timeline, pre-verbal skills are really important, and that's something that supports language learning and develops from infancy. So pre-verbal skills are skills like attention, listening, responding to your name when called, joint attention, imitation, play skills, and and pointing as well, gestures. Yeah, gestures have been known to be a precursor to spoken language. Yeah. So generally speaking, the earlier children who point earlier, talk earlier. Yes. We then move on to, by about their first birthday, first words start to come. Around 12 months, between 12 to 18 months, you get about 10 to 20 words, and then children start acquiring vocabulary. Around 2 years, by 2 years, you would hear them combining words together. So you would hear open door, milk please, orange juice, help me. And between 2 to 3 years, you will see them combining phrases and sentences together. For speech, around 18 months, they are about 25% intelligible. Between 18 to about 2 years, they are about 50 to 75% intelligible. Right. And then between 3 years, they are about 75% to 100% intelligible.
So meaning if a child is not yet 3 and still struggling to articulate certain sounds, then that might not be immediately a cause for concern, is that right? So there might be certain tricky sounds that takes them longer to acquire.
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think leading into the next sort of point that I wanted to share, some tricky sounds are sounds like the L, the R, the S. So we might hear ladder. Instead of saying ladder, a child might say weather. Instead of saying red, the R sound for red, a child might say a wed car. And those are what we call phonological processes. So phonological processes are predictable patterns, speech patterns, where a child substitutes or it takes away some sounds in order to simplify these words to make it easier for them to say.
Right.
Well, there are certain ages where it should resolve, or we call it should go away. And if these don't go away by that specified age, we do recommend intervention. I would like to highlight that there are some red flags though. We call them atypical speech patterns. So these are vowel errors. So a child not being able to say vowels are a cause for concern. So vowels are sounds like your R, your E, your U. So vowel errors are one atypical speech pattern. Another atypical speech pattern will be leaving out the first sound in a word. So instead of saying house, a child might say house. Yeah, exactly. And backing. So for example, instead of saying dog, the child says gog. So duck is replaced by a go. So those are some atypical speech patterns. And the last one would be a lateral lisp. Yeah. So a lateral lisp occurs where the sound escapes over the sides of the tongue rather than through the central groove. So it sounds like, for example, a lateral lisp on an S would sound like this. It's very wet, slushy sound. So instead of sun, a child might say, I see the sun in the sky. Something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those are areas where we do treat and we do recommend immediate intervention.
Sure.
Because it's considered atypical or abnormal.
Okay, so maybe there are certain signs where you would say, okay, it might be a delay and we could wait and see, but there are certain atypical red flags that you would immediately say, okay, we need to treat this, as in they're unlikely to resolve naturally without intervention?
Yes, so we don't consider them developmental.
Okay, great, yes. Okay, so we've talked about some of the tricky sounds, and I wanted to find out, in your practice, what are some of the most common challenges that you see and treat?
Have to think for a while. But we commonly see moms and dads coming in, and they do have a concern. We deal a lot with late talkers. And it's hard sometimes to find a differential diagnosis whether the child is truly a late talker or there's something more going on. And sometimes we do see children with childhood apraxia of speech. So that is a speech motor planning and programming disorder where the neurons or the synapses in the brains are not worked out enough to communicate those messages to the oral articulators. So your tongue, your jaw, your lips, in order to sequence those speech sounds together in the right order to say a word. And we realize that, while children do develop at their own pace, there are certain milestones which should be reached at specific ages. So yes, indeed, some late talkers do develop on their own, but we will never know for sure if your child will be one of those or not. Research has shown that children who receive early intervention do catch up, mainly due to neuroplasticity, and brain development is maximal between the ages of birth to 6 years old. So mainly due to rapid neurological growth. So the early intervention is started, the better.
Yes, so I read in research that the figures are about maybe 70%, like the majority of late talkers would be able to resolve and catch up maybe with intervention, but there will still be a minority that continue to experience these expressive language difficulties, right? Is that what you tend to see as well? Like the majority of them do kind of catch up with their peers, but you see a group that may continue and they might have a developmental language disorder?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to sort of track whether late talkers or this group of children end up having developmental language disorder or in short form DLD. We realize that we don't always have the opportunity to see children across a lifespan. Sometimes they do come back to say hi when they're sort of grown up, but DLD is another sort of terminology that we use to categorize a group of children who have a language impairment. And this definition used to be termed specific language impairment, but it's now renamed DLD. So DLD is a neurodevelopmental condition where children have difficulties understanding and using language. But this is not due to hearing impairments, it's also not due to neurological damage, and it's not due to intellectual disabilities. We see some signs such as trouble learning to read and write. We also see difficulties where children have trouble forming their thoughts and translating that into words. They might also miss out key points when retelling a story. They might have difficulties with forming grammatically correct sentences, limited vocabulary, and some children also have higher language learning difficulties like trouble with inferencing, prediction questions.
Yes.
And the thing is, I think DLD can occur with other conditions such as ADHD, as well as dyslexia.
Yes, definitely. It just reminded me of someone I know, and it might be quite illustrative because he has got verbal apraxia. That was what you were describing before, and I feel that for him, the higher order language facilities are intact because he's able to write his thoughts fairly well, but he's just not able to so it's the motor output that is the barrier for him. Whereas for someone with DLD, they might be, the oral muscles are able to express, but it is the higher order kind of forming, putting sentences together, forming their thoughts. So would you say that's kind of the distinction? So one is at the physical level and the other is like higher order kind of thinking and cognitive functions?
Yeah, I think you sort of illustrated that really well, Vivian. And well, CAS or childhood apraxia of speech, both of them are neurodevelopmental conditions. So developmental means it's typically found during childhood, but the presentation is different. So CAS is is a difficulty with the verbal production of speech sounds, while a child with DLD do not have difficulties sequencing and coordinating their speech muscles in order to produce speech sounds, but they have difficulties with using language and understanding and forming sentence structures, being able to organize their thoughts into a proper narrative.
Yes. So, a lot of parents, I think if their child is showing certain signs of delay, I think a lot of them might wonder like, he or she might just be a late bloomer and so on. When maybe you can give them some guidance in terms of, what are some indicators or when do you think it might be appropriate for them to seek help?
Yeah, sure. I think that's another excellent question. So some red flags that we do look out for would be no babbling by 12 months, no eye contact as well, not responding to a name when called, lack of joint attention. So by that, for example, if mom points to bubbles, the child doesn't necessarily follow the pointing gaze, and no gestures, no social smiles. You might also see children having a loss of words of previously learned speech sounds, and we call that regression. They might also have very reduced imitation of actions. So for example, waving, saying high five, social referencing, they might not have that as well. We also look at quite an important red flag where children don't take interest in interacting with other children. And I think it's important to note that joint attention emerges around 9 or 10 months and is fully and quite well established by around 18 months. So children with autism, I'm bringing up the word here, children with autism generally, in general terms, they may not have that desire or the ability to want to interact with you. And that shared attention or the shared enjoyment, for example, pointing to an aeroplane to tell mommy, look, there's an aeroplane, may not necessarily be present in children who may have autism. And I think that's important to identify and to intervene.
Yes, definitely. So I think a lot of the red flags that you mentioned are really important because they could indicate the presence of autism spectrum disorder, which again, as you mentioned, is a wide spectrum. But we do want to identify those children early to give them the appropriate intervention, which would include speech therapy. Some of them might need occupational therapy as well as other early interventions as well.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought maybe we could, share a little bit with parents in terms of what they can do at home, besides bringing them to a professional for professional assessment and therapy. Are there little things that they could build into their daily routines that would be helpful to their preschooler?
Yeah, sure. So I'll share 3 points. The first one is something called parentees, or we use the term infant-directed language. So parentees is child-directed speech or infant-directed speech where we use very high intonations, high-pitched intonations, and very exaggerated language. So parentees has been known to activate the cortical areas of the brain. And these cortical areas, like the superior temporal gyrus for listening, Broca's area for speech production, and the cerebellum for sequencing speech sounds, are important areas responsible for speech production. So how do you use parentees? I have the acronym SUPER, super, B. So S for stretch your vowels. So for example, you could go to a baby or your child and say hello. So you're stretching the U sound. At the same time, you're also using real words. So U for use real words. P for pitch. So you're going to vary your pitch, having like a nice up and down pitch. Hello, or ready, 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 go. So you're going to have that really nice pitch, and a lot of the times it comes really naturally to us, parents and moms and dads included. E for exaggerate your facial expressions. So, hello. Yeah, and you have that really nice smile, get that beautiful eye contact, big facial expressions, and repetition is amazing for baby brain development.
Yes.
As adults, we like the variation, but babies, they learn through repetition. So that's why we have baby books, brown bear, brown bear, what can you see? And it goes repeating. Yeah, the only thing that changes would be the last thing that the brown bear sees.
Yes.
And R for repeat and pause. So for example, if you're encouraging a vocalization or a coo or a babble, like ba for bubbles, repeat ba, bubble, pause, to give the child a chance to say. And sometimes it can be really hard for parents to pause. So count 5 to 10 seconds before repeating the word. And research has also shown that children learn 40 times faster if they learn through play. So we need to increase play and decrease stress.
Yes, okay, that's excellent. I love that because I think I've heard this very common saying like, oh, don't baby talk your kid, you gotta talk to them as if they're an adult, and things like that. And I think sometimes people misunderstand that to say like you have to literally talk to your child as an adult. But I think you've summarized that very nicely, that we want to use real words, we don't want to use like baby words. But in terms of intonation, in terms of expression, those things are absolutely fine, right? The natural. And I was also thinking about how now I have a term for the way I talk to my dog at home. That's exactly how I use a different voice, so it's called parentees.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, parentees, motheries, or fatheries, or just infant-directed speech.
Yeah.
And it's fun. Have fun with your baby. Yeah, that's the most important. Other things to note would be get face-to-face with your child. So, have your child looking at your mouth rather than sitting your child with his head towards your back. Because that way he or she can't see what's going on with your mouth.
Right.
It's really important. So, for example, if you are looking at teaching your child cup, for example, take the cup, put it close to your mouth so he or she sees your mouth movements. And sometimes speech cues might be helpful as well.
Yeah.
So cup might be a tricky sound to say for a little one, but you can use speech cues like up, and that would be helping them to form those sounds with their articulators.
Yeah. Would you say even in shared book reading, like bedtime stories and things like that, that we should try to position our child kind of facing us so that they could see us articulating those
That's
words?
a great question. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If he or she is a little bit wobbly, and still working on their motor milestones, have him propped up like in a bumper seat or just with cushions and sort of facing you even at a 45-degree angle.
Yes.
And that way the sound comes from the front of the child rather than the back.
Yes, because we kind of recommend that in terms of like, even in psychology and the building that connection and reciprocity, it often helps to have face-to-face contact.
Yeah. So 4 S's. The first S is go slow. Go slow meaning stretching your vowels, and exactly what we talked about a bit earlier. So it's saying shoes on rather than rushing through the words. And that gives your child time to process the keyword shoes on. The second S would be show, so you point to shoes. S, you say shoes on. Say less. So say less doesn't mean using ungrammatical sentences. Instead of saying go and put your shoes on, if you want to target the word shoes, you can shorten the sentence to shoes on. Once your child understands and uses the word shoes, you can add in another word, put shoes on, and it's still grammatically correct. And the last one would be to stress. So shoes on or shoes on. And then again, using that exaggeration, that high and low intonation is really just to get your child's attention so she looks at what you're pointing at. And at that point, for children who already have their first words, how do we then help the child to progress and to expand their word combinations? So one way would be to use self-talk. So talking about what you're doing. So parents, as you're cooking, or moms, as you're cooking in the kitchen, preparing their breakfast, talk about what you're doing. Lunch in the bag, cutting fruits, cutting apple, red apple. You can talk about bananas, peel the banana. You can sing songs as well. I think songs are amazing. Music is amazing. You can leave out a word in a sentence. You could do, for example, a common one, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, teaching your baby body parts, and then gradually leaving out more words. Head, shoulders, knees, and then getting your baby to fill in toes. And at the same time, pointing to the body part. You can also do parallel talk. And that's talking about what your child is doing. So you're like a loudspeaker, basically. You're commenting about what your child is doing. So if your child is playing with a sandcastle, you can talk about words like dig, scoop, pour, up, down, dig, and then bury. So lots of words that you can use. And you can start combining these words into 2-word combinations. So if your child is digging, you could say bucket, and he knows the word bucket. You could add in a color, red bucket. You could also add in a size, for example, big bucket, small bucket. You could add in adjectives, wet sand or sand, and you add in another word, so 2 words. If your child has 2 words, add in 3 words. Scoop, wet sand, and that would be gradually expanding your child's utterances.
Right, that's really helpful. So we will start from where the child is, you're saying, right? So
Yes.
Even when we're talking about what we're doing, like the example you gave, we would not have very, very long utterances. We will see where the child is, and then we would just extend it by a little bit more than what they're saying. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's not to mean you can't use long words with your child, but if you're deliberately teaching your child those words, then it's also good to make sure you emphasize those words by teaching the color. So you're just saying red bucket, and that's red, and then using again that high and low intonation.
Yes, I had a question about that, whether you would also recommend kind of repeating the same few words over and over again. So for example, sandpaper, red bucket, to kind of say them, across a few days, to use the same words, or would it be better to kind of just expose them to lots and lots of different words so you don't have to kind of repeat the same words that you're using? What do you
Excellent
think?
question, Vivian. So we call that recasting. Yeah, and so yes, you would repeat red in many different contexts. For example, red apple, red car, red bucket, and so you're tagging red to different objects. So in that sense, you're repeating red, but then you're teaching the child how to use red in different contexts. But yes, of course, you can expose your child to many different colors, and that's perfectly fine.
So, Lisa, a very common thing that parents talk about is the gender differences, right? So it's very common to say, oh, he's a boy, he's gonna, talk slower, he's gonna develop, he's gonna have a smaller vocabulary and so on. So I wanted to ask you, whether this is backed by research and, what are your thoughts about that?
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question again, Vivian. Yes, the answer is yes, slightly. Boys do talk later compared to girls, but there's a big but. The difference in development is not clinically significant. So what this means is that both boys and girls should reach their speech and language milestones by the given age. So girls do reach their milestones earlier, but boys will also reach their milestones closer to the cut-off age.
Okay, so what we mean is like, if the age is between 8 to 15 months, then the girls might reach it closer to 8 and then the boys, but they should still be within this typical window
developmental
of
range. Yes. But it's also really important to note that boys make up 70% of late talkers. Yeah. So this means that boys are at a higher risk of continued language delay. The bottom line is, if you have concerns, then evaluate.
Yes.
To go for an evaluation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa. That's super
No worries.
illuminating and helpful. And I hope that, viewers, whether you're a parent or a professional who works with preschoolers, that has been helpful for you. If you've got any further questions or comments, just put it in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching.
Bye-bye. Bye. I find that guys only mature at 40 years old.
Exactly, right? It kind of gels with our, we wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.